Peer Gynt Per Ent Norwegian, Per Gynt, Ent is a 5-act play in verse by Gynt Per Ent Norwegian, Per Gynt, Ent is a 5-act play in verse by the Norwegian dramatist Henrik Ibsen, published in 1876. Written in Norwegian, too, it is one of the most widely performed Norwegian plays. Ibsen believed Per Gynt, the Norwegian fairy tale on which the play is loosely based, to be rooted in fact, and several of the characters are modeled after Ibsen's own family, notably his parents Knud Ibsen and Marichen Altenberg. He was also generally inspired by Peter Christen Asbjørnson's collection of Norwegian fairy tales, published in 1845, Huldre Eventyr og Folksagn. Peer Gynt chronicles the journey of its title character from the Norwegian mountains to the North African desert and back. According to Claus van den Berg, its origins are romantic, but the play also anticipates the fragmentations of emerging modernism, and the cinematic script blends poetry with social satire and realistic scenes with surreal ones. 3. Peer Gynt has also been described as the story of a life based on procrastination and avoidance. 4. The play was written in Italy and a first edition of 1,250 copies was published on the 14th of November 1867 by the Danish publisher Gyldendal in Copenhagen. 5. Although the first edition swiftly sold out, a reprint of 2,000 copies, which followed after only 14 days, did not sell out until 7 years later. 6. Peer Gynt was first performed in Christiania, now Oslo, on the 24th of February 1876, with original music composed by Edvard Grieg that includes some of today's most recognized classical pieces, In the Hall of the Mountain King, and Morning Mood. It was published in German translation in 1881, in English in 1892, and in French in 1896. 7. The contemporary influence of the play continues into the 21st century. It is widely performed internationally both in traditional and in modern experimental productions. While Bjørnstjerne Bjørnson admired the play's satire on Norwegian egotism, narrowness, and self-sufficiency, and described it as magnificent, 8. Hans Christian Andersen, Georg Brandes and Clemens Petersen all joined the widespread hostility, Petersen writing that the play was not poetry. 9. Enraged by Petersen's criticisms in particular, Ibsen defended his work by arguing that it is poetry, and if it isn't, it will become such. The conception of poetry in our country, in Norway, shall shape itself according to this book. 10. Despite this defense of his poetic achievement in Peer Gynt, the play was his last to employ verse. From the League of Youth 1869 onwards, Ibsen was to write drama only in prose. 11. Ibsen wrote Peer Gynt in deliberate disregard of the limitations that the conventional stagecraft of the 19th century imposed on drama. 12. Its 40 scenes move uninhibitedly in time and space and between consciousness and the unconscious, blending folkloric fantasy and unsentimental realism. 13. Raymond Williams compares Peer Gynt with August Strindberg's early drama Lucky Peter's Journey, 1882, and argues that both explore a new kind of dramatic action that was beyond the capacities of the theater of the day. Both created a sequence of images in language and visual composition that became technically possible only in film. 14. Characters. Ace, a peasant's widow. Peer Gynt, her son. 2 old women with corn sacks. Aslak, a blacksmith. Wedding guest. A master cook. A fiddler. Ammon and a wife, newcomers to the district. Solveig and little Helga, their daughters. The farmer at Hagstad. Ingrid, his daughter. The bridegroom and his parents. 3 alpine dairymaids. A green-clad woman, a troll princess. The old man off the mountains, a troll king also known as the Mountain King. Multiple troll courtiers, troll maidens and troll urchins. A couple of witches. Brownies, nixies, gnomes, et al. An ugly brat. The Boig, a voice in the darkness. Carrie, a cotter's wife. Master Cotton. Monsieur Ballon. Herr von Eberkoff. Herr Trumpeterstrail. Gentlemen on their travels. A thief. A receiver. Anitra, daughter of a Bedouin chief. Arabs. Female slaves. Dancing girls. The Memnon statue. The Sphinx at Giza. Dr. B. Griffenfeld, director of the madhouse at Cairo. Huhu, a language reformer from the coast of Malabar. Hussein, an Eastern minister. A fellow with a royal mother. Several madmen and their keepers. A Norwegian skipper. His crew. A strange passenger. A pastor, the devil. Peer Gynt thinks he is a pastor. A funeral party. A parish officer. A button molder. A lean person. Act 1. Peer Gynt is the son of the once highly regarded John Gynt. John Gynt spent all his money on feasting and living lavishly, and had to leave his farm to become a wandering salesman, leaving his wife and son behind in debt. Ace, the mother, wished to raise her son to restore the lost fortune of his father, but Peer is soon to be considered useless. He is a poet and a braggart, not unlike the youngest son from Norwegian fairy tales, the Ash lad, with whom he shares some characteristics. As the play opens, Peer gives an account of a reindeer hunt that went awry, a famous theatrical scene generally known as the buck ride. His mother scorns him for his vivid imagination, and taunts him because he spoiled his chances with Ingrid, the daughter of the richest farmer. Peer leaves for Ingrid's wedding, scheduled for the following day, because he may still get a chance with the bride. His mother follows quickly to stop him from shaming himself completely. At the wedding, the other guests taunt and laugh at Peer, especially the local blacksmith, Aslak, who holds a grudge after an earlier brawl. In the same wedding, Peer meets a family of Haugen newcomers from another valley. He instantly notices the elder daughter, Solveig, and asks her to dance. She refuses because her father would disapprove, and because Peer's reputation has preceded him. She leaves, and Peer starts drinking. When he hears the bride has locked herself in, he seizes the opportunity, runs away with her, and spends the night with her in the mountains. Act 2. Peer is banished for kidnapping Ingrid. As he wanders the mountains, his mother and Solveig's father search for him. Peer meets 3 amorous dairymaids who are waiting to be courted by trolls, a folklore motif from Gudbrandsdalen. He becomes highly intoxicated with them and spends the next day alone suffering from a hangover. He runs headfirst into a rock and swoons, and the rest of the second act probably takes place in Peer's dreams. He comes across a woman clad in green, who claims to be the daughter of the Troll Mountain King. Together they ride into the mountain hall, and the Troll King gives Peer the opportunity to become a troll if Peer would marry his daughter. Peer agrees to a number of conditions, but declines in the end. He is then confronted with the fact that the green-clad woman has become pregnant. Peer denies this. He claims not to have touched her, but the wise Troll King replies that he begat the child in his head. Crucial for the plot and understanding of the play is the question asked by the Troll King: what is the difference between troll and man? The answer given by the old man of the mountain is, out there, where sky shines, humans say, to thyself be true. In here, trolls say, be true to yourself and to hell with the world. Egotism is a typical trait of the trolls in this play. From then on, Peer uses this as his motto, always proclaiming that he is himself. He then meets the Boig, a creature who has no real description. Ask the question, who are you? The Boig answers, myself. In time, Peer also takes the Boig's important saying as a motto, go around. The rest of his life, he beats around the bush, instead of facing himself or the truth. Upon awaking, Peer is confronted by Helga, Solveig's sister, who gives him food and regards from her sister. Peer gives the girl a silver button for Solveig to keep and asks that she not forget him. Act 3. As an outlaw, Peer struggles to build his own cottage in the hills. Solveig turns up and insists on living with him. She has made her choice, she says, and there will be no return for her. Peer is delighted and welcomes her, but as she enters the cabin, an old-looking woman in green garments appears with a limping boy at her side. This is the green-clad woman from the mountain hall, and her half-human brat is the child begotten by Peer from his mind during his stay there. She has cursed Peer by forcing him to remember her and all his previous sins, when facing Solveig. Peer hears a ghostly voice saying, go roundabout, Peer, and decides to leave. He tells Solveig he has something heavy to fetch. He returns in time for his mother's death, and then sets off overseas. Act 4. Peer is away for many years, taking part in various occupations and playing various roles, including that of a businessman engaged in enterprises on the coast of Morocco. Here, he explains his view of life, and we learn that he is a businessman taking part in unethical transactions, including sending heathen images to China and trading slaves. In his defense, he points out that he has also sent missionaries to China, and he treated his slaves well. His companions rob him, after he decides to support the Turks in suppressing a Greek revolt, and leave him alone on the shore. He then finds some stolen Bedouin gear, and, in these clothes, he is hailed as a prophet by a local tribe. He tries to seduce Anitra, the chieftain's daughter, but she steals his money and rings, gets away, and leaves him. Then he decides to become a historian and travels to Egypt. He wanders through the desert, passing the colossi of Memnon and the Sphinx. As he addresses the Sphinx, believing it to be the Boig, he encounters the keeper of the local madhouse, himself insane, who regards Peer as the bringer of supreme wisdom. Peer comes to the madhouse and understands that all of the patients live in their own worlds, being themselves to such a degree that no one cares for anyone else. In his youth, Peer had dreamt of becoming an emperor. In this place, he is finally hailed as one, the emperor of the self. Peer despairs and calls for the keeper of all fools, i.e., God. Act 5. Finally, on his way home as an old man, he is shipwrecked. Among those on board, he meets the strange passenger, who wants to make use of Peer's corpse to find out where dreams have their origin. This passenger scares Peer out of his wits. Peer lands on shore bereft of all of his possessions, a pitiful and grumpy old man. Back home in Norway, Peer Gynt attends a peasant funeral and an auction, where he offers for sale everything from his earlier life. The auction takes place at the very farm where the wedding once was held. Peer stumbles along and is confronted with all that he did not do, his unsung songs, his unmade works, his unwept tears, and his questions that were never asked. His mother comes back and claims that her deathbed went awry, he did not lead her to heaven with his ramblings. Peer escapes and is confronted with the button molder, who maintains that Peer's soul must be melted down with other faulty goods unless he can explain when and where in life he has been, himself. Peer protests. He has been only that, and nothing else. Then he meets the Troll King, who states that Peer has been a troll, not a man, most of his life. The button molder says that he has to come up with something if he is not to be melted down. Peer looks for a priest to whom to confess his sins, and a character named, the Lean One, who is the devil turns up. The Lean One believes Peer cannot be counted a real sinner who can be sent to hell, he has committed no grave sin. Peer despairs in the end, understanding that his life is forfeit, he is nothing. But at the same moment, Solveig starts to sing, the cabin Peer built is close at hand, but he dares not enter. The Boig in Peer tells him, go around. The button molder shows up and demands a list of sins, but Peer has none to give, unless Solveig can vouch for him. Then Peer breaks through to Solveig, asking her to forgive his sins. But she answers, you have not sinned at all, my dearest boy. Peer does not understand, he believes himself lost. Then he asks her, where has Peer Gynt been since we last met? Where was I as the one I should have been, whole and true, with the mark of God on my brow? She answers, in my faith, in my hope, in my love. Peer screams, calls his mother, and hides himself in her lap. Solveig sings her lullaby for him, and we might presume he dies in this last scene of the play, although there are neither stage directions nor dialogue to indicate that he actually does. Behind the corner, the button molder, who is sent by God, still waits, with the words, Peer, we shall meet at the last crossroads, and then we shall see if. I'll say no more. Klaus van den Berg argues that Peer Gynt is a stylistic minefield. Its origins are romantic, but the play also anticipates the fragmentations of emerging modernism. Chronicling Peer's journey from the Norwegian mountains to the North African desert, the cinematic script blends poetry with social satire and realistic scenes with surreal ones. The irony of isolated individuals in a mass society infuses Ibsen's tale of two seemingly incompatible lovers, the deeply committed Solveig and the superficial Peer, who is more a surface for projections than a coherent character. 3. The simplest conclusion one may draw from Peer Gynt is expressed in the eloquent prose of the author, if you lie, are you real? The literary critic Harold Bloom in his book The Western Canon has challenged the conventional reading of Peer Gynt, stating, far more than Goethe's Faust, Peer is the one 19th-century literary character who has the largeness of the grandest characters of Renaissance imaginings. Dickens, Tolstoy, Stendhal, Hugo, even Balzac have no single figure quite so exuberant, outrageous, vitalistic as Peer Gynt. He merely seems initially to be an unlikely candidate for such eminence. What is he, we say, except a kind of Norwegian roaring boy? Marvelously attractive to women, a kind of bogus poet, a narcissist, absurd self-idolater, a liar, seducer, bombastic self-deceiver. But this is paltry moralizing all too much like the scholarly chorus that rants against Falstaff. True, Peer, unlike Falstaff, is not a great wit. But in the Taoistic, biblical sense, Peer the scamp bears the blessing, more life. On 5 January 1867 Ibsen wrote to Frederick Hegel, his publisher, with his plan for the play. It would be a long dramatic poem, having as its principal a part legendary, part fictional character from Norwegian folklore during recent times. It will bear no resemblance to Brand, and will contain no direct polemics or anything of that kind. 16. He began to write Peer Gynt on the 14th of January, employing a far greater variety of meters in its rhymed verse than he had used in his previous verse plays Brand, written 1865, or Love's Comedy, written 1862. 17. The first two acts were completed in Rome and the third in Casamicciola on the north of the island of Ischia. 18. During this time, Ibsen told Wilhelm Bergso that, "I don't think the play's for acting," when they discussed the possibility of staging the play's image of a casting ladle, big enough to recast human beings in. 19. Ibsen sent the 3 acts to his publisher on the 8th of August, with a letter that explains that, Peer Gynt was a real person who lived in Gudbrandsdal, probably around the end of the last century or the beginning of this. His name is still famous among the people up there, but not much more is known about his life than what is to be found in Asbjornsen's Norwegian folktales in the section entitled, Stories from the Mountain. 20. In those stories, Peer Gynt rescues the 3 dairy maids from the trolls and shoots the Boig, who was originally a gigantic worm-shaped troll being. Peer was known to tell tall tales of his own achievements, a trait Peer in the play inherited. The Buck Ride story, which Peer tells his mother in the play's first scene, is also from this source, but, as Ace points out, it was originally Gudbrand Glesny from Vega who did the tour with the reindeer stag and finally shot it. Following an earthquake on Ischia on the 14th of August, Ibsen left for Sorrento, where he completed the final 2 acts. He finished the play on the 14th of October. 21. It was published in a first edition of 1,250 copies a month later in Copenhagen. Ibsen's previous play, Brand, preached the philosophy of all or nothing. Relentless, cruel, resolute, overriding in will, Brand went through everything that stood in his way toward gaining an ideal. Peer Gynt is a compensating balance, a complementary color to Brand. In contrast to Brand, with his iron will, Peer is willless, insufficient, and irresolute. Peer goes around all issues facing him. 22. Brand had a phenomenal literary success, and people became curious to know what Ibsen's next play would be. The dramatist, about this time, was relieved of financial worry by 2 money grants, one from the Norwegian government and the other from the Scientific Society of Trondheim. This enabled him to give to his work an unfettered mind. He went with his family to Frascati, where, in the palazzo rooms, he looked many feet down upon the Mediterranean and pondered his new drama. He preserved a profound silence about the content of the play, and begged his publisher, Hegel, to create as much mystery about it as possible. The portrayal of the Gynt family is known to be based on Henrik Ibsen's own family and childhood memories. In a letter to Georg Brandes, Ibsen wrote that his own family and childhood had served as some kind of model for the Gynt family. In a letter to Peter Hansen, Ibsen confirmed that the character Ace, Peer Gynt's mother, was based on his own mother, Marichen Altenburg. 23-24 The character John Gynt is considered to be based on Ibsen's father Knud Ibsen, who was a rich merchant before he went bankrupt. 25 Even the name of the Gynt family's ancestor, the prosperous Rasmus Gynt, is borrowed from the Ibsen's family's earliest known ancestor. Thus, the character Peer Gynt could be interpreted as being an ironic representation of Henrik Ibsen himself. There are striking similarities to Ibsen's own life. Ibsen himself spent 27 years living abroad and was never able to face his hometown again.